Hello and welcome to the Writ Nerds Podcast, Episode 10. Today we speak with Tim Anderson from the Philadelphia Fire Department, which he's been a member of for 13 years and currently assigned to Squad Company number 72. Tim also owns and operates Anderson Rescue Solutions, which offer many products to deal with rope rescue and downed firefighters. This episode, Tim will discuss some of his products as well as give us some insight on a line of duty death that he and his crew was involved with. We hope you enjoy. Welcome to the podcast today, guys. Another Rid Ops podcast. It's been a little bit here. We've both been very busy. Some of us had to entertain some COVID issues as well as some family issues. But that all straightened away. We have Tim Anderson from Anderson Rescue Solutions. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you for having me, guys. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, it's glad we finally could link up here. It's been talked about many times, but
It has.
So, just bringing up Philly, want to give us a little background about yourself?
Sure. Tim Anderson. Been in the fire service since 2001. Been in Philly since 2008. So I think next month I hit 13 years here in the city. Started as a volunteer. Went to college in North Carolina. I only applied to schools where I knew I could still volunteer while I was there. So I kind of got the bug pretty bad. But then by the end of my freshman year, I was taking tests, mostly throughout the Northeast. So thankfully it worked out with Philly shortly after I graduated college in 2007. So that worked well. Spent my first 5 years or so at Engine 16 in West Philadelphia. And since then have been at Squad 72, which is one of the 3 special operations units for the city. So we are a rescue engine that also has a full range of special operations capabilities. So we cover a first due as well as sort of the north half of the city for major fires and rescues, or citywide as necessary if either the other SOC companies are out or there's a real major incident. In 2016, I founded Anderson Rescue Solutions to try to bring to market some equipment that I felt filled some gaps that I had encountered. Started with the multi-loop rescue strap, and then kind of tumbled down the rabbit hole from there. And now there's a whole bunch of stuff for tech rescue, RIT, some tactical stuff. So it's kind of taken on a life of its own. So I probably should have rolled over in bed and forgotten about the whole thing, but here we are. So,
yeah, that's actually how I was introduced to you through the rescue strap there. Sorry, the multi-loop strap. I found that on the fastboard through some fastboard training, and next thing you know, I went to work the next day and I grabbed my length of webbing and started putting some loops in it. I'm like, this is an awesome idea, or some overhand knots to make loops. So, and then eventually I was like, why don't I just go buy one? So,
well, there you go. I appreciate it. I hope everybody just goes and buys one.
All right. Well, it's nice. One drill night, my chief showed up and threw me 4 of them. I'm like, what do you want me to do with these? He's like, they're for our team. Put them where you need them. So I was like, all right.
I like it.
So, I mean, I've used the strap numerous times. Its advantages really outweigh the very, very few disadvantages. And, I think it's a tremendous strap. As much as I'm a big fan of carrying a loop of webbing, a 20, 25 foot piece, this thing is at the same level. So
great. I mean, the whole point of the strap is just something that, it's webbing that works in the environment that we need it to work in. So, I mean, if you can't see, can't feel, your pulse is 200 and you think you're going to die, a loop of webbing is just not going to work. And that's what the multi-loop rescue strap is designed to work in. It's just designed to be ultra simple so that you can actually package somebody in that environment and try to go from there. So
the one question I always get about your strap is the difference between the carabiner and the bull ring. Like, is there, what's the major
takeaway? The first version of it was the one with the rigging ring sewn in. I wanted a tactile reference point in the center. So you got the 2 end handles, which with 11 mil rope sewn into them, so you can feel those. But I wanted another reference point. So that gives you the center point. You can use that for rigging for vertical lifts or to find the midpoint to add a carabiner to attach to a down fireman, things like that. Guys, kept requesting to put a carabiner there. And at the time, I started with the rigging ring version myself. I keep an extra carabiner clipped on the front of my coat. That I've, because always kind of with the mindset, if I need a carabiner there, I'll just add it. And it won't be that big of a deal. Actually, as I think we're going to talk about later, but the fire that killed Lieutenant Matt Letourneau a couple of years ago, at one point during that extrication process, I wanted to do that. I wanted to take the carabiner off my coat and put it on the rigging ring, and I was too exhausted to do it.
Right.
So where the rigging ring has kind of found a home is more for tech rescue stuff. So for confined space jobs, water stuff, places where you've got other carabiners around, and generally you have the visual ability and the dexterity to mess with it a little bit. The rigging ring is a great asset there for frontline operators in high stress environments like the fireground or tactical. The carabiner version is nice to have because you have that option built in. So that's kind of how I describe it. If you're using it yourself downrange and high stress, the carabiner is nice because it can still be a rigging ring if you want it to be, but you have that ability to go ahead and make connection points with it. And the rigging ring is still great. Like if there are a ton of carabiners, another carabiner in the chain is kind of annoying. So it's a little bit high speed, low drag for that kind of stuff, and slightly lighter weight. But that's kind of the difference between the two.
Okay, good example there. I don't know who runs your media side of ARS, but scrolling through Instagram and now Facebook, as much as I try not to go on that, I see your pulleys everywhere. It's like people are throwing them against any piece of metal they could find just to show that they're magnetic. I know you've hit on this in other podcasts, but that's a tremendous feat to come up with in the rigging world. So what besides the pulleys do you have on deck?
On deck or out now?
Well, on deck, if you could hint to anything.
Let's see.
If not, I understand.
There's a couple irons in the fire. The problem right now is just being a small company or an awkwardly small, more medium-sized company that's still being run by people all part-time. It's
Right.
just the time factor of, like, for example, yesterday I spent, 4 or 5 hours running around doing different nonsense. And then I spent 15 minutes on R&D on a new project, which I really wanted to spend the 4 hours on the R&D and the 15 minutes on the other nonsense, but that's just how it goes. So there's a lot of things I'd like to work on. Some tech rescue stuff for some mass transit stuff, for some water rescue, some accessories to go with the pulleys and some other stuff. So
nice.
Little Black Book has many ideas in it. Just need enough time to put some effort into them. So we'll see. We'll see.
All right. Well, I understand, you don't want to give too much away, but that little photo you put out the other day of the R&D, yeah. I was like, oh, what do we got here?
Yeah, so that's the one I spent 15 minutes on and then was staring at the ceiling line, going to sleep last night, trying to figure out how to make it work in the head. But I could tell you, but
awesome. No, I understand. Well, as many know, we've said this before, we're trying to move our podcast to keep it open, talk about training, talk about stuff that's been brought to our attention in the RIT world, and but we're trying to really learn as much as we have our NIOSH reports and other papers that come out on studies, like the Asheville study and stuff like that, the Fairfax study. We do learn a lot from there, but most of all, as we know in our line of duty, that you really truly learn from your hands-on or firsthand experience. Mm-hmm. We're going to talk about Lieutenant Letourneau. Sorry, I hope I don't butcher that too much.
That's good.
And what happened that day. If you could give us a rundown of a basic, how the call started out, and then to where it kind of got sideways for you guys.
Sure. So thinking about this today, I kind of came with 3 disclaimers I want to put out there first. the first one being, it's kind of odd to talk about these events, and you feel some sort of weird. It almost feels guilty talking about them. But reflecting on that, and especially on what happened, and but Matt in particular, Matt Letourneau was really into the job, into learning, into studying, and he would want any lessons from this job talked about. So that's kind of how I, justify that. So that's important, I think. Hang on, my computer's doing something weird. All right. Can y'all still see me?
Yeah.
Yep. Sorry. Yeah. So number one, I think he would want the lessons from that job discussed. Two, the opinions I'm going to give are my own. And as we all know, everyone's perspectives, especially during high stress events, are going to be different. So, especially if any Philly guys listen to this or guys who were there, I fully understand that they might have a different take on some of the things than I do, simply because, how we absorb and process information in these environments is going to be different. So I fully understand that. So I'm not going to try to say anything too crazy or anything. Right. And then finally, the mistakes we'll talk about will be my own. And any successes are all based on the team. So I'm happy to talk about my mistakes at this job. Obviously, everybody makes mistakes that lead to things, but we can let other people talk about theirs. But the ones I'll hit on will be my personal mistakes. And then again, any successes, like one of the things that's weird about this job was that given the environment and the circumstances, I think we did a decent job. But that's a weird emotional trade-off because it was a terrible day and we lost Matt and we weren't able to do what we were doing fast enough to get him out. So right. So it's a weird thing to kind of wrestle with on that level. But anyway, but the successes are all because of the team, because of outstanding guys working really hard in a difficult environment. So so that job, it was January 6th, 2018. It was stupid cold outside. We'd just gotten through a pretty bad snow and ice thing the days leading up. It was my first day back to work after being off for a month with the birth of a kid after a really difficult pregnancy. So it was kind of a weird, morning back to work, and that was our first run of the day. So it was kind of a nutty way to start back after kind of being out of the game for a month or so. Job came in at 8:54 in the morning, or at least that's when engine 45, Matt's engine, arrived on scene. And the temperature and the weather conditions were a big player. So you couldn't even fit down the block. It was on Colorado Street. One of the most annoying things about urban firefighting in snow is that the small streets don't get plowed for weeks in a major city. And so they end up getting these car-sized ruts down the snow, but the fire truck is wider. So trying to get it down that street without smashing all the cars on either side, because it kind of throws the truck around. Right. But anyway, so they parked on the end of the block. The dwelling was kind of mid-block, so it was a decent stretch to get there. So no apparatus in front of the dwelling at all. Autos, snow, ice. I think it was a pretty sustained wind that day, and the temperature was probably 8 degrees outside. So right off the bat, they had water problems. My unit went on the sort of the what most people call a working fire dispatch. In Philly, for a dwelling, you get 4 engines, 2 ladders, 2 chiefs, and if it goes to a working fire, what they say 2 and 2, when you put 2 engines, 2 ladders in service, you get a RIT ladder, and the first 2 SOC company. If it goes all hands, you get an additional SOC company. So that was technically in Rescue 1's local. They were operating on another job, so we headed down on the 2 and 2. Rescue 1 eventually jumped off that job to go to this one, and we got recalled, but we continued that direction, and within 2 minutes it went all hands anyway. So So we got there pretty quick. But the water was a huge problem right away. You could hear it on the radio. They couldn't, getting working hydrants was a big issue for all the engines on scene. And simultaneously, as they were trying to make entry, they found an occupant in the front door. So right away it's an occupied dwelling. This isn't. We get a ton of vacant work in Philly anyway, and I could go in a whole spiel on vacant fires and how they're not vacants because vacant buildings don't light themselves on fire. But anyway, but you knew right off the bat that it was an occupied dwelling because they pulled somebody out who unfortunately died from their injuries. But so right away you've got that, you've got water supply issues. We ended up coming up the street behind engine 45, and my lieutenant, his first orders to me, they got sent to go check the delta exposure. But he told me, he's like, dude, get 45's water. So I gave them our tank and then helped them stretch to another hydrant, which ended up being their third hydrant that they had tried, that thankfully they were able to get water out of. So that kind of set the tone there. So working up to the job, when I made it to the front of the dwelling, my guys to just kind of clear the delta. There's trapped smoke, but no fire. And we were out front, and they were having difficulty. It was a hoarder. And I mean, you can see from the photos in the NIOSH report how much junk was in there. So they're having trouble getting in. They're having trouble making the second floor. As the driver, I was assigned to the roof team. So I ended up going to the roof and starting to work there. And initially we were on the fire dwelling roof, and then that roof kind of got crappy. So we were operating off the delta exposure, but making cuts along the party wall, which is something we do pretty frequently. If there's a dwelling that's kind of rocking and rolling a bit, we'll make it's basically a trench cut, but it's not doing what a traditional trench does. I kind of call it like a party wall relief cut. Basically, we're cutting a trench along the party wall so that the heat can escape before it just pounds away at the adjoining dwelling. So anyway, so we're working on that. And looking at the timeline, I think it was 39 minutes in when the collapse occurred. And during this time, engines were in, they were out, they were in, they were out because they kept losing water. So the first engine would lose water, and the second engine would go in with their line. And some of the things that kind of came out of this were the extreme cold made it look like the job was going better than it was from a smoke perspective, with the whole sort of white smoke phenomenon. And there's a bunch of stuff on that in the report and all. But engines were in and out. And one of the difficulties there, I don't necessarily have any problem with that tactic, which we can get into, but the big thing I think there is you need to communicate. Everyone on the fire ground needs to be aware if we're currently pulled out or if we're currently in. Just because that, like when I was on the roof, there was some confusion where I thought we were operating exterior, and I didn't make a couple radio transmissions that I would have made had I known we were interior at the time, based on some structural conditions I was looking at. But anyway, so 39 minutes in, the collapse occurs, and I don't think anybody really knew what had happened. There was a mayday. There's a couple of simultaneous things that happened. So there was a guy who had just made it, one of the search guys from one of the ladder companies had just made it to the sort of the second floor landing when the collapse occurred, and he rode the collapse down, which is pretty gnarly. And the way that it split kind of down the middle, he ended up he saw a light through the rear kitchen door. The way layout or row houses, it's kind of like a living room, dining room, kitchen layout. And where he came down ended up sort of right at the entrance to the kitchen. And so he was able to see out the door and just kind of beelined it. I mean, his boots were off, like the whole 9 yards. So,
oh, wow.
So you got that guy. Then you had, I think, two guys on the steps, one of whom the officer of either second or third engine gave a mayday. And they kind of got tied up on the steps and were pulled out by a couple different folks from either my company or rescue who were operating on that first floor. one of the miracles of this job, there were like 5 or 6 guys in that first floor, and only Matt got pinned. So it could have been, not that it wasn't horrific enough, but we could have lost whole companies in
Right.
there. But one of the confusing things, so a Mayday goes out, the guy who gave the Mayday is kind of tied up, like physically. And when the dude goes rolling out the back door, the chief in the rear sees him come out, and says, "Oh, we got him out the rear." So, I was on the roof, and saws are running everything. And so it was like, "Whoa, did you hear that? Was there a Mayday?" And then I see a guy out the back, and we kind of be like, "Whoa, that was crazy." And you hear the chief say, "Oh, we got him." So it's kind of like this thing is over. So we kind of went about our business on the roof, like, wow, that was nuts. All right, I guess something happened. It took a couple minutes for me to understand that there was still an ongoing incident.
Tim, can I stop you real quick?
Yeah, go for it.
Did conditions change after the collapse that you guys noticed on the roof?
No, not that I remember noticing. Yeah. I mean,
okay, sorry.
We kind of went about our business. We were starting to ask for a hose line because it looked like the fire conditions on the second floor were going to start kind of burn through the roof. So we kind of started to try to get a hose line from command, and he kind of told us not right now. And we're kind of like, wait, that was one of the clues. It was like, wait, something else is going on here. But it took a couple minutes for me to even realize that there was an ongoing Mayday. So,
now that was the person that was in the stairwell still.
No, so the stairwell guy and the guy with him, within the first 30 seconds of the collapse, the guy made it out the rear who rode the collapse down, and the guys on the stairway were extricated by the guys who were kind of standing right there in the living room, who happened to be guys from the interior team of my company and some guys from Rescue One.
Okay.
And they did an emergency evacuation to get everybody out. And so that's kind of where we stood. They got all those guys out, and then it was kind of a par check that led to, wait a minute, somebody else is still in here, and also a pass alarm going off that some of my guys heard early on.
About how long do you know, or could you estimate from the time that what they thought was everybody being pulled out to the time that you realized, or the fire ground realized, someone might still be inside or was still inside? Was that a long delay, or it felt long and it was more like a minute delay?
I don't know, but let's look at I've got the report in front of me here. All that stuff is in there. Stand by one second. One of the most interesting things about this whole deal has been the time compression. I didn't know how long it took us to get them out until I read the report, honestly. Or until my interview with NIOSH, and they said, "Oh yeah, it was this long." Let's see. So 33. It was within. Looks like it was within 5 minutes. Yeah, so it was within a couple minutes that they knew. I don't know. I mean, that's what the timeline indicates.
Yeah.
As far as when guys had hands on and said, we hear past the alarm going off, et cetera. I don't remember. I wasn't there for that part of it. I was kind of doing my thing on the roof. So.
And now you guys heard the pass alarm outside?
No, that was my some of my guys who were operating on the first floor heard it down there. So.
I always wondered about that. If, somebody is, motionless, that we could hear that from the outside with operations going on or rigs going on. So I was curious to that.
Yeah, I'd have to ask those guys. I mean, I know the initial chaos of the scene. You got 2 guys coming out the front, 1 guy coming out the back. Everybody's, the guys who are in there are relatively stunned, and you still got a good smoke and fire. So it's, no one knew what we were dealing with really until 3 hours after the job. I mean, the photo of the collapse. It's kind of on the cover of the NIOSH report.
Right.
I didn't see that photo until the next day, because once our operation was kind of done, we cleared the fire scene while they were still fighting the fire. And I remember just being like, I remember kind of feeling sick to my stomach. Like, I had no idea how bad the collapse was until those photos surfaced from after the job was over, just because of the conditions. It was still burning the whole time we were operating.
So we go from the Mayday's been declared to a par check, and now we realize we have a missing firefighter still.
Yeah. So I think pretty quickly they were able to locate Matt. The guys from Squad 72, the two interior guys and my lieutenant who were down there, heard the pass alarm and found him. And we knew who it was right away. They were able to identify him. So that all happened pretty quickly. Once I kind of realized that it was ongoing, and my lieutenant actually made a call to me to come down off the roof. And we realized, wait a second, there's been a collapse. Like all that information kind of evolved out. There wasn't like a, at least that I heard, there wasn't any kind of scene-wide, hey, we have an ongoing collapse, Mayday situation, etc. That kind of leaked out in the next couple of minutes through the radio traffic. But so I made it down. Myself and another guy from 72s made it down off the roof, and I went in the first floor of the dwelling to have a face-to-face with my officer. Like, hey, what are we looking at? What do we need? I could kind of see in the background some activity and that we had a collapse, and so we just made a quick like, hey, what do we need to grab off the truck? What do we need here? So we're talking about grab the we run the Hurst hydraulic extrication tools, which are phenomenal. But it was kind of a, hey, let's grab that and some airbags and we'll see what happens. In retrospect, you know that what you're working with, but at that moment we didn't know, is this going to be a 2-minute extrication or a 3-day extrication? Right. You can't tell. So I turn around and I go to the front of the dwelling, and the engine officer, actually the guy who called the Mayday, is walking up the steps with a set of hydraulic spreaders and hands them to me. And at this point, the chiefs had cleared everybody out who wasn't from 72s or the rescue. So I told him, I said, he hands me the spreaders. I'm like, all right, well, let's go see what we can make happen. Maybe this is a quick thing. And I told him to tell the other guy from Squad 72, who wasn't from our shift, he's working overtime that day, who was walking up the street. He got down off the roof after me. I said, go tell him we need X, Y, and Z off the truck. And so I went and turned around and went in to start trying to work and see what we could accomplish, which was my first sort of big mistake, and probably my, holistically, as the driver, I'm kind of responsible for logistics on operations like this. And I totally blew that. I kind of got sucked into the rescue. I knew Matt fairly well. And again, like, you don't know when you first start that this is going to end up being an hour-long operation with shoring and all. You think, okay, I've got a set of spreaders. He's pinned under the floor. Let's see if we can pop this real quick and drag him out, which ended up not being possible remotely. But yeah, I kind of blew it, and logistics ended up being an ongoing issue for us as we realized we needed more and more equipment. And a lot of that's kind of my fault for not stepping back, and running that show. But in retrospect, if you do end up with a major operation like this, and this was a big takeaway for me from a RIP perspective, if you do end up with a major extrication operation, you're going to have a lot of guys who want to help. So take those guys and just strip a truck. If you've got a rescue truck or two on scene, get a pile in the front lawn, like I don't know, you can put it in a pile or do the whole salvage cover thing or whatever. But like in retrospect, I would have told the first ladder, like, look, stretch your cord reel down here and get a salvage cover, and then send all your guys to my truck, and we're just going to strip it. Like, I don't care what it is. Get me 10 guys and go grab a piece of equipment, take it to the front and come back. I don't care what it is. Just strip the entire truck and puke it up in front of the structure that you're working in. Because the back and forth stuff is going to kill you, especially if it's, in this case, we're down an icy street and around the corner, for our truck. Rescue 1's down an ice chute the other way and around the corner. You know, by the time the collapse unit's dispatched, it can't get close because you got a full box plus a second alarm. Yeah, like you can't get the trucks close. So take 20 guys, 10 guys, and just go strip the trucks. Like, don't say, I think we need this. Just take every stinking piece of rescue equipment off of it and chuck it in a pile in the front yard. You know, that's one of the big takeaways there. So we started working on Matt. And he was, so you can see from the pictures in the report, it was a V-shaped collapse. I didn't know that till the next day. I thought it was a lean-to. Again, we had about a foot of visibility max. Throughout the incident, we tried some stuff with fans, trying to move the smoke. Most of the fire on the first floor was knocked. It was still burning pretty well on the second floor. But because of all the debris and everything, there was just tons of smoldering and crap. So Matt was trapped. He was in a seated position facing the rear of the structure, and basically the nature of the collapse, the cause of death was positional asphyxiation, which basically means that he was pinned in such a way that he couldn't breathe, and that's how he died. He actually, I don't think, had a broken bone in his body, which is pretty remarkable. But he had so he has all of these beams coming down at an angle kind of across his shoulders and back, and then the debris that was pinned by those on top of his legs. So we had to kind of, the interesting, one of the crazy things was, you know, he's in this position, and by the time I even made it in there, they already had, they had a rescue strap on him. That's the other thing. And you've got 4 or 5 guys surging with adrenaline, pulling on him, and we couldn't budge him an inch. I mean, he was completely, utterly pinned. So the first operation was to kind of loosen him up, to lay him back, to kind of make him flat. His SCBA was pinned, so we had to cut that off of him. One interesting tidbit, I carry a set of lineman's pliers, and the high pressure cable on the Scott SCBA we could not cut with lineman's pliers, the kind of braided silver cable.
Okay.
I'd love to get a set of it. I should ask Scott for just a 5-foot scrap piece, but we ended up having to cut that with hydraulic cutters for extrication. It was such a thick piece of metal, but basically we had to cut him out of his SCBA by cutting the shoulder straps away, to lay him down and remove his mask and all that kind of stuff. And then kind of shoring as we went, we had to individually lift each of the floor joists one by one until we relieved enough of the pressure on his legs to then slide him out. So it was kind of I think we used two rams and a set of spreaders, kind of going joist by joist. And then we captured stuff as best we could with Paratech and some extrication shoring that was just available. It was quick and easy. We could grab it off the trucks easily. So that's kind of how it went down. And I mean, the whole time we couldn't really see, so it was pretty tricky. But that's how we made it work.
Nathan had a question for you. He said, "How far into the building was the collapse?"
So here was one of the other weird things, and it's a miracle that there was no secondary collapse. The point of impact where the collapse reached the floor of the living room was probably 20 feet in. I mean, we're not talking a really deep. This building is probably 16 by 35, something like that. I'm sure it's all in the report, but the actual failure started just inside the front door. And so each of the floor joists split at the midpoint, starting just inside, and then kind of each split got worse and worse and worse in a V shape until the impact point, which was kind of the dead center of the house, kind of about 20 feet in.
Right. Did you guys have a crew working on let's say the alpha side of the collapse compared to where you were at? at the firefighter's position, trying to remove debris or anything?
No, I mean, there was a double window in the front that they would use a little bit to slide equipment in and out. But there wasn't a whole lot to do out front. It was kind of because we had no idea that collapse was over our heads. And the basement floor subsequently had cracked as well. We had no idea about that. It's a problem between a fireground, Mayday collapse versus a regular collapse operation, that you take a lot slower and that you investigate the floor below, you investigate all these things and kind of shore your way in. We were shoring and working at the location of the entrapment, and kind of oblivious to everything else because it was impossible to know. You couldn't see, we didn't have 30 SOC guys to send into the basement and send all over. Like you're working with what you have, as quickly as possible. So it was kind of a make do situation and not the way you would do a traditional collapse rescue.
Yeah. Seeing the photos from the NIOSH report and the 2 Paratech struts sitting up there. I mean, just getting those in and set up in a smoking condition under that high stress, that's an amazing job to you guys. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. Amazing job to you guys and the people that were working, because, as we know it, there's guys that have trouble outside in the daylight setting those up under stress sometimes. So, that's a feat in itself.
Well, what we were even, I don't know if we had any idea what we were even grabbing. It was kind of like, well, this looks like something, so we'll put one here. In the photos, you see this weird decorative beam looking thing. Yep. And that was where visibility sort of started. Like that was as high, like I knew there was this weird beam there. And then we had these joists coming down, but I never even operated on the sort of the Bravo side of the pile. I was always on the Delta side, kind of working that void between the party wall and the collapse itself. So we just didn't know. So it was kind of like, well, we're lifting this floor joist, it's collapsed, so we'll try to grab it with something to capture our progress so it doesn't come down on us more. But it was kind of a grab what you could and hope for the best kind of deal.
Did you guys have a tremendous amount of movement with the rams and the spreaders?
So it was a royal pain because of the hoarding conditions. You're used to pushing off of something solid. And so like you try to use a spreader and it would just squish down into the floor because there was piles of clothes and junk. So we had to get chunks of cribbing in there to spread the footprint out. So each push had to go off of a piece of cribbing on the ground because the ground was too squishy. Like there was nothing to push off of. And even with the floor itself having failed beneath us. So we had to sort of solidify the base that we were pushing off of to do each of those lifts.
Right. So now, meanwhile, this is all going on. You guys have still fire on the second floor. I'm assuming host teams are still operating offensively or defensively?
They're defensively from the exterior, hitting the second floor above us. But the trick there is that they're adding more weight the whole time, which is a big part of the report. Is just look at the amount of water we flowed into the dwelling, and then the fact that it was a hoarder, so a lot of the materials inside the house absorbed a lot of the water, which captured that weight. So it was tricky, but we had to at least keep the fire at bay. There was a hose line, I think, available to us on the first floor. We didn't use it a whole lot. The Engine 45's hose line was wrapped across his leg, so we had to have them drain that on the interior in order to free him. That was one of the things trapping him. But so there were guys operating outside, hitting the second floor from the windows.
So from a command's perspective, we had 2 different operations going on by 2 different chiefs, correct? If I understand it right, the way the report read? Like fire attack versus rescue?
Sort of. Command is one of the problems at that job. The report kind of goes into that with the appropriate chiefs not getting on scene in the right amount of time. I'll let the Philadelphia report goes into that in detail. If guys find that online, I'll kind of let them read up on that. Right. But my focus, I was just inside trying to do rescue stuff and asking for equipment. So I wasn't paying much attention to what was, the command structure was
Going
kind
on
of
outside. Yeah.
just saying, look, I need a Sawzall and I need a strut. And I was the idiot who should have been going to get it. So that's from my narrow perspective there, I didn't have a whole lot of input on that.
Okay. The other interesting I took from the NIOSH report is that one time, one of the crews called for fire ground silence and for hose lines to stop flowing. Any idea of what that was to regards to, maybe to locate or gain perspective of where they were in the building?
I'm not sure. I'd have to look up when that happened in the time frame.
Yeah.
I mean, the difficulty, and again, memory is selective, and it's tough to remember what even, trying to process my own memory of the event. But I know the smoke conditions on the first floor were really difficult, and so and the extrication took over an hour. It was 62 minutes from collapse to extrication. So we're in there just kind of eating the smoke. Honestly, you couldn't have fit in the void that we need to fit in anyway with a pack on. So so trying to manage the smoke, we tried different things, having guys fog out the front window for ventilation, and then put some fans in service, blowing from the front to the rear, then blowing from the rear to the front. It was kind of a complicated process, trying to match that with the wind that was occurring that day. So it could have been related to just ceasing those operations to not impede us, but I'd have to go back and read it. Again, my perspective on the job is pretty narrow to what we were facing on the interior. So.
Right. Yeah, I understand it's hard, just going through that report, though, there was a couple of interesting things that stuck out like that, ceasing talk on the radio in operations. You never think about that. So that might be a part of the game plan to work for you. Mm-hmm. So you hit on earlier when we were talking about the multi-loop strap that you wanted to hook a carabiner. One thing many of us talk about in the RIT world is the stress of the firefighter and the fatigue aspect of it. I mean, you guys said you were in there for 62 minutes. I'm sure there was people coming in and going out to relieve each other, but you said you had trouble with a carabiner. Can you jump on that?
So the big problem, when I talk about RIT, and especially RIT training, these events don't happen in a vacuum. And that's the trouble with training wise, is no matter how realistic you make the training, you're never going to achieve the same level of emotional fatigue and mental stress as the real deal. Because in training, that, in an hour or two, you're going home and having dinner, or going and having lunch and watching the football game. So the collapse occurred 39 minutes into the job. So my unit and Rescue 1 had both been operating probably, we'll say 30 minutes prior to this even occurring. So, we've been carrying equipment down the street and going in and out of the Delta, and then I was going up on the roof and cutting holes, and that's all before we started a Mayday operation. So, and as we, know from the statistics, the RIT in the front yard is doing the Mayday 10% of the time as far as the extrication is concerned. So
right.
This idea of having fresh guys all peachy clean, ready to come do this is just not very realistic. So you have to look at the fact that most of the guys doing the rescue are going to be starting from a baseline of fatigue. So you take a baseline of fatigue, you take a guy who's been on a bottle for 15, 20 minutes already, and then say, oh yeah, Mayday just happened. And things are a little hairy. So his pulse is already elevated and it's going to go through the roof. And then, and you're dealing with, when we were trying to get him out, you're dealing with the the emotional aspects too. You're kind of like, wow, this is actually happening. I know this guy. It doesn't look good. We're doing the best we can, kind of thing. But yeah, so I remember thinking, I want to get so we use a couple straps on him to try to help pull him out. and we kept moving them on him depending on how much of him we exposed. And from where I was operating, trying to lift these joists with the tools, it was a terrific sort of body angle. Like it wasn't a, from an ergonomic perspective, trying to wedge these tools into this small space in a collapse and a void and a fire. It's not like you're, in a parking lot cut up a junk car or anything. Like you're in a really horrific position. And I just remember like thinking I had to conserve every conceivable amount of energy possible. So if there was a movement I didn't have to make, I shouldn't make it. And that was one of them. I was like, well, I really want to reach up and unclip this carabiner, but I don't know if I can. And if I can, I don't know if that exertion of energy is worth it. So I'll go to a plan B, which was pretty remarkable. Like looking back on it, being like, wow, like that's not a big deal. I mean, it was just a non-locking carabiner I wanted to unclip from a big loop on the front of my coat, and I couldn't do it. So that one thing alone has shaped, a lot about how I think about RIT and kind of a simplicity aspect. Like simplicity has to be the baseline. It's always easy to make things more complex, but you have to be operating and you have to be training from a baseline of we need to use the most simple, the simplest techniques we can, because of what that environment's going to be and what the physiological responses of the rescuing firefighters is going to be.
Yeah, that's a pretty interesting takeaway that, you had the cognitive thought to say, hey, is this wasteful energy, what I'm doing right now? Sometimes we don't have that opportunity to think that or work through that. So that's pretty wild to hear.
Well, it took a while. I mean, and there was downtime in there when we made one lift and it wasn't enough. And so we need to wait for another set of spreaders to come or another, again, going back to my own part in the logistics nightmare. But,
right.
But so there was time and one of the interesting moments in there was trying to pull back and process is like, whoa, I'm in the middle of a Mayday extrication right now. This is kind of insane. Like I remember having that thought of like awareness of what was going on and where I was and feeling kind of, it was wild.
Yeah.
And yeah, difficult.
Well, I like where you hit on the simplicity, everybody's like, oh, well, we load the Stokes basket with this equipment, that equipment, we drag it to the scene and we don't use any of it. Well, like you said, if you could have the truck on the front lawn stripped out of it, you'd have everything at your disposal. But, kudos to you and the strap. I mean, that thing has been making a bunch of rescues in Philly this week or this past month or two, right?
Yeah, all over the place. There's a couple I haven't posted. It was used several times on jobs in Philly. Some of those folks didn't make it. Some of those folks did. Rescue one in Durham, North Carolina, used it on a really difficult hoarder rescue a week or two ago. I think 2 out of the 3 people they pulled out passed away, unfortunately. But they used it there on somebody. They used it in Connecticut on a job, somebody who survived. So it's been getting some use. But I mean, I don't take, the company motto is Soli Deo Gloria, to God alone be the glory. If any good stuff comes from this, none of it was my own anyway. I'll just take credit for the junk. So,
I mean, it's doing its job. So it's cool to see a product that it's working as it says it should. So
good, and that's been encouraging. Hearing the feedback. It's a lot of work getting this company up and running, and a lot more than I ever anticipated. But it does make it worth it when it seems that the tools are making a difference. So I'll take that.
I've seen it's gone into the water rescue side a lot lately. Is there any more movement on that?
Yeah, so I've got a whole bunch of video planned. It took me so long to edit it, and it got cold. I'm probably gonna wait a month or two and just kind of release it in the spring when people start thinking about that again. But yeah, we did. I got a bunch of PA water instructors together and went out on the river one morning and did all kinds of fun stuff. just using all ARS products for boat stuff, for rope stuff, and yeah, it was pretty neat day. So I'm really excited. There's some great content that came out of that day, and yeah, it's good. I've been trying to make that silly thing float for 5 years. It's been harder than I expected, but we'll get there hopefully.
Right. Throw some floaties on it like your kids have.
Yeah, man.
Absolutely. So, I don't know if Jim or Nathan, if you guys have any other questions for Tim here.
Sorry, I had to jump off there for a few minutes. I took a work phone call. And maybe you've already talked about this, but with an internal report and the NIOSH report both coming out, did you see many discrepancies between the two, or were they both pretty much parallel to the findings and the investigation?
They were parallel. I think that the NIOSH report is more of a copy of the Philly report, and the Philly report goes into more detail.
Okay.
I was actually, a lot of times you hear about these reports, and I was very pleasantly surprised with how the Philly report came out, with the stuff they did hit on, the stuff that they kind of intentionally, I think for good reason, shied away from and left out. But yeah, I think they did a pretty decent job with it. This job, the one interesting thing about this fire, and that brings up another kind of building construction point, is that, generally speaking, I'd fight the same fire the same way tomorrow. So one of the big takeaways, at least the reports are talking about with this, is the time that we were offensive for, contributing to the collapse. Obviously, of the hoarder. There was also this issue with these wood joists that failed, had a notch taken out of them about 100 years ago for a gas pipe right in the center, right where the collapse occurred. What role that played is kind of a mystery. Some people think it played a huge role. Some people think it didn't play much of a role at all, because it's not like this house is unique and they've been going to fires in this neighborhood for the last 100 years. This is a very, very heavy fire load area of the city. So it was kind of a, the fire ground is an uncertain, dangerous place, and sometimes you're going to lose. And that's kind of what happened that day. There wasn't a lot of, there were a couple issues, but there weren't a whole, some line of duty deaths. You get like, oh, well, was so-and-so not there? Did so-and-so not do their job? Or did this engine screw up? Like, that's not what happened there. Had it not collapsed, we had the bulk of the fire knocked down, and we would have overhauled and gone about our business, and is what it is. And, they had a fire a few weeks later, 2 blocks up, with the exact same scenario, same heavy fire load, first floor. They explored it later, same notched out joists, and we lost that day. The big problem is that, ordinary construction, we kind of operate with this mindset that we can be in there forever. And that's true to a point, but now age and lack of maintenance has made us fall off the backside of that curve.
Yeah. Sorry.
Go ahead.
And I don't, you guys didn't experience it here, but I'm sure you are seeing it in your city, that the renovations being done where people are gutting these row houses and leaving the shell, and then they're rebuilding the interior with lightweight, type 5 construction. No longer do you even know what is being put in there. And, I think in the other side, like the more suburban areas where, you're running single family dwelling neighborhoods, I think for a long time we've put this focus on like, you're okay in dimensional lumber and you're not okay in type 5 or
Correct.
lightweight. And that's not accurate, because I use my personal home as an example. Our utility room is right underneath our front door. It's an unprotected room, right? So our basement is finished, but the front door, the front entrance to our house, underneath of it is, if there's a fire in our utility room, it's going to have a direct impact on the dimensional lumber that holds up our house. And in a vent limited fire where it doesn't break out for an hour or two, that stuff is still being decomposed, or, pyrolysis is still taking place. And we have this, don't worry, that's a dimensional lumber neighborhood. You're okay to operate in there. And
Mm-hmm.
you can still be going into this structure that has been compromised. So, it's
Absolutely.
nice to have the knowledge of how long different types of lumber lasts under fire, but that does not equal translation to the fire ground. And that's why I like when people focus more on, you still have to find the lowest level of fire and try and attack it from there. And then, like you're saying, the timeline still matters. There is a point at which we have to be able to recognize, like, okay, we've been operating on this fire ground in and out of the structure for this timeline here. When do we consider saying, like you said, we have the fire it's mostly knocked down. When are we reevaluating the risk benefit ratio or formula as the fire continues through its time?
Yeah, and that's the trick, because you don't know anymore. I mean, let's assume for a second that the 5-minute lightweight and 20-minute ordinary rule is holding fast. Like, that makes me feel warm and fuzzy that I can know that I've got this time, but it's just not true. Because it's funny, one of the guys I work with has a joke that a tube of caulk could have saved North Philly 50 years ago, but now you have all these houses that no one has maintained. They're all leaking. They've all got rot, and you can look at the front of them and have absolutely no idea.
Yeah.
And so it's just that tricky, okay, everything we do, we have to be more careful of. But again, there's no way to know. I mean, even if you told me, hey, watch out for this house, it's suspect, you just don't know. You just don't know. I mean, at the end of the day, firefighting is a dangerous occupation, and we can do our best, and every once in a while, it's just going to bite you in the rear end.
Yeah. I agree with that completely. And I think you've said that kind of twice now, and it relates right back to that quote. We can do everything right in this job and still get killed.
Absolutely. And I think this is a prime example of that job. I mean, sure, in retrospect, because here's the thing. If we had pulled out, let's say we pulled out, if collapse was at 39 minutes, let's say we pulled out at 20 or pulled out at 30. We would have put water on the fire, knocked it down, and then a bunch of suckers would have gone in to do overhaul.
Yeah.
So sure, we could have gotten lucky, and the collapse could have occurred between the time we pulled out and between the time the guys went in for overhaul, but it could have had the exact same outcome had we pulled out early. So It's tough.
Yeah, you could what if every fire all day long, or every call even all day long. And sometimes the what if game is pretty good. It's when you're learning, and training. What if we did this, or what if we did that? But like you said, you don't know. You can't. You have a certain amount of cards to play with, and
Exactly.
You probably don't have that card. So
exactly, it just goes. If there's one lesson, it's get out in your local. Get out and drive around and gather as much pre-incident intel as you can, because once it's rocking and rolling, it's too late. So
right. Well, I think we took a bunch of lessons from you today. Even though I think you were a little hard on yourself for personal accountability, but obviously you still played a tremendous role in what happened that day. So, and I know it's not easy to speak to, and I really appreciate you taking the time, and the energy to talk about something of this magnitude. It's unfortunate because we need to learn from certain situations and firsthand operations. So, from all of us here, thank you for taking this time.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate the opportunity, and these are weird incidents, but if you don't talk about them, you can't get the lessons out there. And I was just a small part. I mean, one of the guys who was from Rescue 1, who's heavily involved in the extrication, I think this was like his 5th line of duty death extrication.
Wow.
In his career. He's been on multiple fatality line of duty. I mean, the guy's got some crazy experience in this topic. And even my guys on my shift, we lost Joyce Craig in 2014 in a basement fire incident, and it was my guys who found her. I took the night off. I had to swap that night. But but it's kind of a crazy amount of experience that some of these folks in my city unfortunately have dealing with this. So we need to find ways to share some of the lessons from this so that other people can have some benefit from it. But no, I appreciate the opportunity and what you guys are doing to push this stuff forward. I mean, people need to up their game in this area. RIT is everybody's job, so I appreciate all your guys' efforts to train and push the message out there.
Well, hopefully this COVID disappears soon, because it's putting a damper on everything we're trying to do, from training to, actual calls regarding fires. It's in my area, it's been ruthless with that. So,
well, I'm sitting in my basement on quarantine right now. I get tested tomorrow.
Oh man,
awesome.
So who knows? We'll see. 2 of the guys I worked with last week are both positive, so I might have it myself right now. Who knows?
Yeah.
You'll get your brain scraped.
Yeah, really.
Exactly.
I've been tested like every other shift, so a couple quarantines myself. It's been wild.
Yeah.
I've avoided it. When my crew got quarantined, it was actually the shift before I got back off holidays.
Nice.
Canada has COVID?
Yeah, it does. It's hard to know what's going on up here. You guys have been stealing the news for the whole world for the last year and a bit.
You could have all that news. You could have all that news.
Canada needs some riots and some political unrest.
Yeah, you can have it, man.
You should go march somewhere or something. Start something.
Do you guys have any statues or monuments up there?
For the sake of the audience listening, below the 49th parallel, no.
Pretty sure Columbus discovered Canada. I'm going up there and rioting. Totally concerned over that.
Nathan just saved Canada. Tim, I would definitely like to have you on in another episode and go over some, we'll talk about training or, just basic RIT stuff, not stuff related to any line of duties, So we definitely have you on again in the future.
Awesome.
And I'm sure that rabbit hole will be deep.
Yeah. No, you guys hit the nail on the head with the term RIT nerd. I'm all for some RIT nerdery. So yeah, I'd love to do that sometime.
To be fair, I want to get my hands on some of your equipment there and get, down that rabbit hole.
Excellent. Yeah. We'll make it happen.
So, guys, anything else to add before we close out this session?
Sorry. Go ahead, Nathan.
Just thank you. I'll apologize for the fact that I was not 100% attentive because of the morning here, but running around with the kids, getting them to eat and brush their teeth. But no, thank you very much for coming on. Like you say, it's good to share it. Like even Don Abbott figures he's only getting 30% of the Maydays happening out there. And we think of how much information that's given us and how that's changed how we're looking at RIT and how we approach it. So the more information that people are willing to share, and unfortunately, I think it's sometimes, I know with like my job, a lot of the times when these incidents happens, it's guys being embarrassed to share it, and embarrassed is the wrong word, because like you say, the fact is stuff happens and sometimes we lose. We can do everything right and it still goes wrong. So it's important that we share all that as much as we can. So Thank you very much.
Same for me. Just thank you so much for coming on and having this conversation with us. I don't want to repeat what the other two guys said, but I feel the exact same way. Thank you very much.
Yeah, really.
So that's it for today, folks. Thanks for tuning in. Big thank you from Tim from Anderson Rescue Solutions for coming on and telling his account of what he's encountered. Tim, where can people hit you up if they need questions on equipment or just in general?
Yeah, definitely. So the website is just andersonrescue.com, and then Anderson Rescue Solutions on Instagram and Facebook. You can get me through any of that, or just info@andersonrescue.com is the email address. So yeah, any of those things, and please check us out.
And just so all of you know, Tim doesn't pay me. He doesn't send me stuff. But the Anderson Rescue Solution, or the multi-loop strap, there's so many things.
There you go.
The multi-loop strap is something you guys definitely should look into. Whether it's for your department, yourself, your crew, whatever. It's relatively inexpensive compared to other stuff that's on the market for sale for firefighters. Definitely get your hands on one and give it a try. So with that, Tim, thank you.
Thank you guys. Appreciate the opportunity.
Anytime. You guys have a good day.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to the Writ Nerds podcast. We've got a few more lined up. Hopefully we'll be dropping one every month for the next couple months. Thanks for your support, and we'll see you on the next one.